and why musings in the first place. And then I'll just pause after that, and then we can see where that goes. And then if it makes sense, we can pick up from where we were the last time. But stepping back, basically the question is why? Oh, you have somebody else coming in on it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm going to switch to iPad.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, just stepping back, the question is why cosmology of light in the first place? And what I wanted to focus attention on, just one second, one more person joining in, is this notion that light is ubiquitous, when we think about it. And scientifically, for instance, we know that every single atom, whether it forms animate or inanimate matter, it's forged in the light of the suns or in the math of the supernova. And so by definition, everything that surrounds us, everything that is us, has a deep signature of light inside it. And then further, where we sit, we're constantly grounded into a massive light-based operating system simply because of the action of photons. So we know that 98% of quantum particles are photons. It's the most prevalent quantum particle that exists. And it's a carrier of light and of information. And so all the time, there's millions of photons streaming into our eyes and recreating in our brains an image of the world around us. And so without that, we wouldn't really also be grounded in this common operating system in which we all sit. And then we also know from a nutritional perspective that any living being, if we trace back the process of nutrition, we can come down to a simple process of photosynthesis, which is at the base of all nutrition. And therefore, there's also a complete dependence on this energy from the sun for any living being to sustain themselves essentially day to day. And so there's an incredible dependence on light. And without light, it's fair to say that we wouldn't exist. And yet we don't really consider light. We take it for granted in general. And the big question is, what if we were to begin to develop a different relationship with light, given that it is ubiquitous, given that without it we wouldn't exist? Is that even possible? And that really is the spirit of this cosmology of light. So let's take whatever facts we can or whatever we've learned about light and begin to penetrate into what that really implies. And if we do that, we can come up with this framework that I call cosmology of light. So that's kind of the background of it, or that's the reason, why we're probing into this on an individual basis or in sessions like this. It's to penetrate more deeply into what light is and what it's suggesting about our nature and the nature of existence. Okay, so let me just pause there and welcome Dolan as well. I see you signed on. So.
Thanks.
Yeah. So what other, before we continue, and we can, as I said, we can take this in two different directions. One is to just field any of the thoughts that you may have had in reading some of the musings. We can pick up anything from that side, or in the last conversation, we had begun to explore developmental models from different perspectives, and we can kind of juxtapose that with the developmental model that's suggested by a cosmology of light. and just see how they interrelate or not. So
Can you please say a couple of words like you've done about what is cosmology of light, about or where it came from,
sure.
about what is the framework?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very simple starting point is, for me at least, was, why does light have this constant speed of 186,000 miles per second? So it's a constant that we assume that's fundamental to our understanding of physical existence. It has impact on other constants. But what really is the significance of it? There's a school of thought. So if you go into, say, quantum physics, and Anand can collaborate this or corroborate this, but essentially, there's a school of thought that just don't think, just measure, just keep kind of computing and measuring, and don't ask questions as to why, and that's a very prevalent school of thought. So you just try and examine the facts, and you try and piece together what reality might be from the facts, but you're never asking why things are a certain way. And in a cosmology of light, the starting point is essentially, why is light traveling at 186,000 miles per second? What's the significance of that? And that's the starting point of cosmology of light, because I assume in this cosmology of light framework that there could also be other speeds of light, and each of these other speeds would create a reality that would be different. And the cosmology comes together when you consider the interpenetration, in a sense, of these different realms of reality that are all caused by different speeds of light. So that's the framework, or that's kind of the assumptions that by which this whole framework was developed. And so, very simply, if we take three possible speeds of light, one of course is 186,000 miles per second. Then a second, if it's projected at zero speed, what would reality look like? And the third is, if light traveled infinitely fast, what might reality look like? And you can begin to piece, what the boundaries of such a framework would be, and what the implications are. And then you can fill in the gaps by considering light to exist at other constant speeds as well. So in this framework, there's different constant speeds that each have a meaning and an implication. So that's really the background of how this cosmology of light was pieced together.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
So now I understand last time that you spoke about zero and limitless. Like I didn't have this.
You didn't have that context. Yeah.
Into.
Yeah. So it's simply, the question is, it's taking a very simple fact of existence and just extrapolating. Suppose this fact of existence, we could think about it differently, then what might the implications be for a comprehensive reality? And that's really what the starting point is.
I had a reaction based on your intro before, talking about how light is ubiquitous and what does it mean if we can develop a different relationship with it. And I remembered in our talk, you provided an exercise where there was a juxtaposition of looking at an object with our physical eyes, so looking at the computer or our mouse with our physical eyes, and then looking at that same object through our mind's eye or some other non-physical observation method. And that was a way of developing a new relationship with light, and or even looking at that object from the context of like maybe an inner light or in light. Yeah. And what arises of your perception of that object. And that kind of, first of all, shows a different relationship that we can have with light, but also juxtaposes our physical limits, where our physical eyes are restricted by c equaling 186,000 miles per second. That's the context and realm in which our physical senses arise. But perhaps our consciousness, as evidenced by experiences that people can have, may not be limited by that physical constraint where c equals 186,000 miles per second. And that was sort of an interesting exercise to play with that intentionally.
Yeah, yeah. I think that this notion that we can potentially have access to layers of light that travel differently, in a sense. I mean, that's where it comes from, because if, if we assume that every object is, at least our perception of an object is habitually, we tend to see it a certain way because we use our physical eyes, and our physical eyes themselves, as you summarized, have been trained to see things a certain way because of the way light travels, and the way light moves from one object into our eyes. So there's a certain kind of mechanics and dynamics that habituate us to see things in a certain way. However, if we can tap into something else where light travels differently, and since in this kind of framework you have light that interpenetrates, then it should be accessible. No matter how light is traveling, it should be accessible, and we should be able to experience things differently as well. So that's the notion of kind of seeing with the mind's eye. Of course, the mind's eye might mean different things for different people, or different people might see things differently based on how they're habituated to kind of exceed this limit of seeing things. And different people are going to see the same thing differently. But so there's a lot of variability in that. But it opens us to this notion of in a sense, dual vision, or tri-vision, or quadruple vision, or however we want to think about it, where we can see the same thing, or experience the same thing, or connect with the same thing in a completely different way, if we allow that part of us to become active, in a sense.
You remind me a little bit of the old Seth books. Are you familiar with any of those?
No, I'm not. Can you say a little more?
Okay, so in the 70s, early 70s, I see Scott nodding. I see Natty not responding at all. And, in the 70s, there was a woman called Jane Roberts who started channeling what she claimed was an interdimensional being that was very nonlinear in time.
Energy, personality, essence.
An energy, personality, essence, exactly. Right, and she wrote a series of books that were channeled. One was called The Nature of Personal Reality, and a lot of them had to do with multidimensional perception, right, rather than single frames, so simultaneous multi-perspectival perception. And so if Pravir has met my friend Annie, she would say that imagination is prior to physical reality, right? So a lot of people have it the other way around, but she goes that imagination is actually kind of, it starts that way. And so it becomes a question. Well, people say, well, is what you're talking about metaphorical?
Let's do 245.
Is this a way of navigating a subtle reality that is actually more real? So my friend Annie would say imagination is more real than reality. So she would say that a subtle perception has just as much reality, if not more, than this physical reality. Hi Annie, I'm talking to Pravir. You can jump in if you want. She's over there, right? There. Right. So Pravir, say hi to Pravir. There we go.
Hi.
Right. Okay, so these frames, people would say, they kind of denigrate them to, oh no, that's just an imagination, right? But that's just as much reality as anything else. If you're not biased or prejudiced towards the physical.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's more real, a pie or a banana? Like the number pie or banana?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What's more real? I mean, so that's a great question. I think it's actually pi. So
Yeah. So Plato.
Yeah.
And he says, I don't know how to do this, right? But Plato would say that the perfect forms are more real than the physical. Okay. So if you collapse that hierarchy between the physical and the imagined, right, then what Pravir is talking about is, I think, is that you can jump into imagination space. And what Seth would say is that these other realities are real. They actually exist and they are manifest, as well as our own probable selves living through multiple, the Copenhagen interpretation, into multiple bifurcations into like infinite dimensional space. And what starts to happen, I think, as your psychology develops into these upper levels of development, is time stops being linear, and you start to see the mind is not limited by the mental model of physical space anymore.
Time is mind's bitch.
Time is mind's bitch.
Yeah.
time is
Exactly.
What
Mine. She said, "Time is mind's bitch."
Oh.
So it's that way round.
Okay.
You should definitely join in, Annie. Right.
Yeah.
So it depends what you consider as the outer frame, and what's the objects, what's the coordinate system, and what's the objects within it. So that's what I would say.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I always learn something new from you, Anand, so that I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, in a way, it fits in with cosmology of light really well, because you have the ultimate potentialities at a realm where light travels infinitely fast, and we're just, you know, one manifest layer of that. And it would say that the other ones actually exist, but you know, this is the one that we're currently experiencing, at least physically.
Yeah, yeah. And then, you know, if we go into the interrelationship between these different
One
layers.
sec. I'm just. I'll be back. I'm just closing out the rooms, and then I'll come back.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. That was very interesting, because I don't know if you saw Annie on the other side, but I haven't had that experience before, where, you know, we were talking about interdimensional space, and that actually happened physically, where we connected two different channels together for a brief time. But anyway, but
I
the
was also curious about the dream realities that we like when we talk about imagination. Like there might be a very subtle difference between the dream realities that we really have, and when we are dreaming, then that might look very real as the reality, like how Anand was saying, like as an imagination, the imagination, and if we reduce the gap of that hierarchy, so then like maybe a comparison between the dream, because really we travel to those different levels or different worlds like during our night sleep. So between that and the imagination and the real physical reality, because something like that, like what we can imagine, that means it's already in the process of manifestation. Maybe it might take a couple of years to manifest, but it's already in the process. It might take like depending on the thing, like 10 years or 20 years or something like that. So that's also a very essential reality, like with the kind of way we experience light, like kind of. So any thoughts on that?
yes, no, I think what you just summarized makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm sure each of us can recall times in our lives where we've imagined something that has occurred, or you know, even if we're working on a project and we can imagine what the outcome is, we can imagine how we need to do things differently. So it's still in a subtle space, but that kind of imprint of thought that we've given it now begins to change how it may play out physically. So certainly there's that interplay. And then there's also some very unusual experiences that people have reported. And perhaps these happen in more meditative states where you may see something or hear something that doesn't seem to have a bearing on immediate reality, but it plays out or it becomes more real over time. So there's a different space-time dynamic that you somehow access temporarily, but it has an imprint or impact into how things are going to play out in this time-space reality. So I think there's a lot that certainly I don't understand, but when we think about cosmology of light, all we're doing is we're just saying that, hey, these different layers that we hypothetically have access to because the nature of light is one. It's a question of becoming more sensitive to the dynamics of these layers, and we all can access it, and therefore change how life is kind of happening for us if we can use that as an active dynamic and how things unroll from day to day for us. But so I think, Dolan, what you were saying makes sense. Yeah.
And also I wanted to add like what Anand was saying regarding reducing the hierarchy between imagination and physical reality. I think we experience that every day in our dreams, probably, like, because when in our, like, during the day when we are awake, we are just like dealing things with our outer consciousness. But in the dream, we are kind of shown many different realms. Like we had actually like suppose if we meet a person and we get some imprint, but our conscious mind is just on the outward level of interaction, and what our inner mind grasped is kind of put back. But in the dream, it comes back and shows. So it's kind of different realities that's been presented, which we many times don't realize in the physical, but actually we have gotten that impression.
Yeah, absolutely.
You stole my questions, so you answer my questions about the meditation. But I think that in meditation, you actually deal with the three elements altogether, sometimes at the same time. So you have the physical, you have the imagination, and you find yourself in a place that you don't understand even where you are, which is like weird sensation. You don't know exactly where to put your hand because it's probably not, you can't explain it in words. And that's like another dimension. And I think that meditation brings them all together into, like in parallel. I don't like the word hierarchy because I don't think there is any hierarchy. So they all coexist side by side, per of my understanding, and you're just switching between them. So
yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Maddie. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the point also being what I take from it is that it's like any technology. This also, meditation is a technology that, in a sense, collapses what might um, normally be thought of as different worlds or different sets of dynamics that we may assume remain separate. But when we meditate, somehow the technology that comes into play is something that can collapse it and allow a different kind of dynamic to happen. And I think that, as with anything, like if one were to become a really good basketball player or whatever it is, but you've got to practice and you have to keep doing lots of drills and you've got to become very familiar with what's happening, what different players are doing, and so there's a learning curve, and there's no shortcut to anything. And so meditation is pretty remarkable in the sense that it can take us out of our frame very quickly, and it seems very magical, but it's only like the tip of the iceberg because it's only hinting at something that needs to be developed a lot more, for these realms to interpenetrate in a sense. So
yeah, it opened the door. So it's opening a door.
Opening a door. Yeah, yeah,
So like if you meditate a lot with open eyes, I know the same thing happen if you're taking drugs. So it's like interesting.
Hmm.
Everything that is alive start to have glow around it,
Hmm.
and everything that doesn't have a light doesn't have glow around it. So yeah, it's a form of light. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that you don't see in with regular eyes. You know, many so people say that taking drugs is a shortcut for meditation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I haven't experimented with the drug angle, but my sense is that in meditation, it's a repeatable process in the sense that you follow a few steps and you can, in a sense, replicate, or something then happens that you can expect at the end of a certain meditation in a certain sense. But I don't know if the same thing happens with drugs. I don't know if it's something that's repeatable, if it's the same, or whether it's number of diverse things that you might experience. So
Yeah, I don't have any experience with drugs as well. Just a burning experience I know to compare to other people notes. So I don't have any experience as well. I think that both of them generate chemical reaction in your brain that help you or take you to a state that you can see or feel or be in a certain state that you are not be able to do it in a normal like conscious way. So how it's being done above my pay grade, I don't know.
Is it generating a chemical reaction that's enabling that, or is there something more fundamental that you're tapping into that then also shows up as a concentration of chemicals or a chemical reaction?
So it's a good question. I don't know what it is, but I would agree that the end result is chemical, but what generates the chemical? It's an interesting question. Yeah.
But even in meditation, the chemical signals, the hormones, and the way the brain signals, they change. So if you think of those as chemicals, but I think the drugs that, especially the psychedelic drugs, like as much as I've heard, it really takes you into a very different level of consciousness that might give you some impressions, but it cannot, it doesn't, it actually keeps you like, I don't know if there are different planes, uh, like in the philosophy, like it might be a vital consciousness that it takes you, and there one might have very good experiences, but it isn't something really real and really opening up towards something higher. One gets stuck into a level, something like that, that I have heard, but I am not very sure because
But what is real? So the question is what is real. Maybe what they see is real, and what we see is
actually, like, there are different levels of consciousness. In some level of consciousness there is an expansion, and in some level of planes there is the feeling of expansion, but it's more at the realm of desires and more, so it's not really taking you out of that chain and bondage of emotions and desires. So when one takes that psychedelic drugs, one enters into a might look like an euphoric experience, but it's still in that realm of desires, emotions, and pulls and pushes of like that, and it gives you a very different feeling of attracting you, but it's very different from when there is a spiritual experience.
so you're
So
saying it's more artificial, like when you're taking drugs, it's more artificial than spiritual.
pardon?
It's more artificial when you're taking drugs rather
Yeah,
than
it might mimic some of those experiences, but it's more of like it'll put you back, it'll keep you entangled into those levels of desires and like showing you attractions, like how there is a sometimes, like how on the earth we have an attraction for something and we feel it's very good and beautiful, and we there is a magnetic pull and we go towards that. But something that's higher, there is not that passion, like kind of like a violent desire, but something that's more kind of opening and liberating. So that's the kind of experience. And I also wanted to ask like about, or maybe add about that previous discussion we were having. So I was also wondering at the concept of time, like past, present, and future, when we think about the different dimensions of imagination, dream, and and the present moment. Like, so like how we were discussing, like because the hierarchies, the boundaries vanish between that. So I'm just wondering, like as we experience light in a lower dimension and we experience the concept of time, but when we go to this realms of imagination and all, and we have inclinations of future events or maybe past impressions, so maybe the boundaries between the times also vanish, because in reality, it, like if we can see it in all in one dimension, is future is just something that is working itself out from the present moment. So it's all kind of linked, and past is something that brought the present moment. So it's like kind of present everywhere, and the past is just a powerful expression that's being put out in the moment, and future is working itself out. So also the boundaries between time also kind of might diminish, and therefore I'm just wondering, like when we go into this higher realms, maybe we are experiencing light at more infinite, at more higher speed, so that there is more and more diminishing of the boundaries.
Yes, yes, that makes sense to me. Let me comment on that also from a cosmology of light point of view, because space, time, energy, and gravity have a kind of precise meaning, or there's a certain way in which I've interpreted it in the framework of cosmology of light. So when we think about cosmology of light, so if we think about the layer where light travels infinitely fast, then there's four, we become aware of that reality because, as we hypothesized earlier through a thought experiment, that when light's traveling infinitely fast, it's going to be present everywhere at the same time. It's going to have a power that's going to be omnipotent in a sense, because it will prevail over any other kind of influence over time. And there's going to be an omninurturance, because everything will be connected in the fabric or nature of light. And then there's going to be also a complete knowledge, because whatever appears or disappears is happening in that fabric of light. So light records it in a sense. So, we extrapolated that there's these four properties that have a very large meaning attached to each of them. So knowledge is something, we roughly call it knowledge, we roughly call it power, presence, and harmony. But the point being is that there's infinite information that exists in that layer of light. Now, as light kind of projects itself at slower speed, in a manner of speaking, then there's a diversification of these four things, and they split up, they reveal more of what's inside them. So knowledge becomes a set of knowledge, power becomes a set of power, with infinite number of elements that are all related to knowledge. So you see there's a diversification, and then as light projects itself even slower, there's more of a differentiation, because then you have these subtle seeds that come into play. And these subtle seeds are unique combinations of these different elements from these four large sets. And so when light now travels at 186,000 miles per second, in this cosmology of light framework, um, there's a precipitation of these subtle seeds into more material form. And all those infinite number of seeds require a certain arena in which to express themselves. And that is something that we can refer to as space, is this massive arena that becomes the playground for all these different ideas to evolve over time. Time itself takes on a specific meaning, and that meaning is basically that we see the maturity of these different ideas that exist in seed form becoming more and more material over quote unquote time. So time is not absolute, but it remains relative. But it's a quantized um, phenomena that comes into play when light slows down enough that the kind of converse or reverse of the speed of light, which we referred to earlier as kind of like Planck's constant, when that takes on a finite value, then there's a quantization of space-time, energy, and gravity. And energy is essentially that kind of mechanism by which you have these subtle idea forms becoming matter through energy that's unique to them. And then gravity is also, from this point of view, is the coordination or a collectivity of seeds or seeds and seeds, so different groups of seeds. But there's this quantization that is creating very specifically a basis for how space expresses itself, time expresses itself, energy expresses itself, and gravity expresses itself. And to your point, these differentiations or quantizations have a different meaning when you think about light traveling much faster. If it's traveling faster than c, then that quantization value is much smaller. So whatever is being quantized can't contain itself in a packet. And so you have a different kind of much more subtle materialization that may take a wave or a field form. So things spread themselves much more widely. So space and time become entirely different. Time collapses into something, into a continuum where past, present, future are in a sense one. And space is again much more fluid because something that exists at one quote unquote point in that space simultaneously exists everywhere else because there's a field or a wave reality that connects things, which is different from this quantization that we experience here in material form. And so space-time, energy, gravity, and the experience of them are entirely different in each of these layers as per cosmology of light.
For me, when you are speaking about that quantization of the light thing,
Yeah.
it also kinds of brings a correlation like with how our mind perceives thoughts. Like the more we go at higher level, there is more that wider thing, but the more we come down to the level of intellect and the mind, there is fragmentation of thought, and we are taking each truth and working on it. But at one moment we cannot perceive like multiple truths. We can perceive it intellectually, but we cannot perceive it like at the mind. And especially if we go to work more at the practical level, it's like we can do one or two things at the same time, but the more we go higher, we perceive that entire wideness. So when you are talking about that light fragmenting and quantizing as small energy particles, it's the same concept as we also experience, like
Yeah.
mind fragmenting thoughts and fragmenting truths. But the more we go to higher levels, there is a more oneness.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's also one of the main kinds of developments that we are faced with, or the challenges we're faced with in this realm where light travels slower, and therefore there's by definition a much higher level of fragmentation because everything gets fragmented. And in a sense, that thing that was unified when light travels infinitely fast has become completely fragmented in this layer where light travels much slower. But in essence, it seeks for its integrality or the unity because that's the nature of what it is inside itself. And so always, we'll find that practically there's this developmental effort to try and combine different points of view to see beyond how we may habitually see. And whether we're talking about development in organizations or development at the individual level, we if we take kind of a frank view, my perception opinion is that it's really about, in a sense, piecing together these different things that have, in a sense, been fragmented. But there's then the question is, why does it get fragmented in the first place? So here, if philosophically, if you have like myriad material points that are distinct and you can integrate them, then materialization takes on a different meaning, or manifestation at the material level takes on a completely different meaning if you can unify it, because you remain distinct, but yet you share something that's common. And in a sense, all that diversified complexity can now be unified in a very kind of sophisticated, harmonious way, in a sense, where the distinction is still maintained. But anyway, that's just a point of.
And I also think that this entire reason for the multiplicity of creation is also like kind of acknowledges why this reason for fragmentation, even though it can look to us as ignorance and darkness and sometimes a lot of struggle, but at the same time, like it's very important for the play of the universal reality as multiple dimensions. Like if there was just one human being, one could experience only certain amount of energy, certain amount of diversity through that form, particular form. But because there are so many multiple human beings, there is that beautiful diversity, even though we clash because of the separateness of the ego, we clash our thought process. But if we can go above that, then we can unite everything and it would be a beautiful creation of multiple things, giving a wider picture.
Yeah, it completely makes sense to me.
Pravir will talk about how love is the expression of love is these fourfold properties. Once they become quantized and separated and distinct, working together to form a cohesive reality is an expression of love. And that's in a way something we have to learn, and kind of why we're here. So if you think about light traveling infinitely fast, it contains all knowledge, but it in a way has no way of understanding it. It has no way of coming to an understanding about its own nature, about itself, because it just is one. Like you said, if there's one person, you don't have other people like you to learn more about yourself and learn more about your possibilities. So when that infinite realm creates those possibilities, it allows it to in turn learn more about itself. And then we're just in turn pieces of this conscious universe that has chosen to step down into manifestation to learn about itself. And we're just a piece of that conscious exploration and that learning process.
That's beautiful, that bringing thing of love, like, and bringing it as a cohesive reality. That's really beautiful.
Okay. Can you keep on doing it for the other three?
Sorry, say again?
Can someone keep on doing it for the other three? So Scott discussed about knowledge. What about power and the other two?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
So
Like the four
just
properties,
say
yeah?
a little more about what you were thinking.
So I'm not thinking, I'm asking. So
Yeah.
there are like four properties, okay? And Scott
Yeah.
just passed one, and he said like if you take those four properties and you look at them when the light is infinite
Yeah.
or the light is zero, it manifests differently on love. So I loved what he said about knowledge, but someone can take it to power and the other two and
Yeah.
try
Why don't you try one of those? Just give it a go, see what happens.
me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Otherwise, I wouldn't ask.
No, I'll say a few words, and then you can add. Whoever wants to can add. So basically,
I'm just one separate bit. I'm just being provocative because to create contrast, so that the conversation is itself as an example of opposites rather than coalescing into a mushed single ideology. So that's what I was doing. That's what I do.
Okay.
All right, sorry.
No, you don't have to be sorry.
Sorry, why sorry?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, so Nadi, you got to tell me whether I'm going down the right track or whether I'm kind of addressing what your thought was there. But yes, if you think about, I'm going to say a few different things. But if you think about light traveling infinitely fast, then through the thought experiment we did, we came up with 4 properties that might animate that reality, which we call roughly knowledge, presence, power, and harmony. Now, it's those same 4 properties, regardless of, in this point of view, remember, this is just a cosmology of light point of view. So in this point of view, there's, when light precipitates or begins to travel slower, there's a symmetry of those 4-fold properties so that you begin to see the same 4 things from a different point of view. So you see something, a different face that's projected. So knowledge, when light travels slower than infinity, but yet way faster than c, what we're hypothesizing is that knowledge becomes an infinite set of knowledge. So there's all kinds of elements related to knowledge. But similarly, power becomes an infinite set of power. And so there's a diversification of what power means. And power could mean things like energy, adventure, justice. I mean, there's all kinds of variations for that thing or the theme of power. Okay, so it's an infinite set that may define that as well. And so similarly, harmony, there's mutuality, love, um, togetherness. I mean, so there's a vast number of kind of diversifications of what's ingrained or what's hidden inside this thing that we call harmony that expresses itself. And when we think about presence, it's also things like there's a massive meaning to what presence is. So presence at a fundamental level, it's kind of like creating an environment of presence. So you may be there to serve, become diligent, become persevere, become humble. I mean, there's so different things that are related to this idea of presence. And so there's this massive diversification, but yet it's only because there's this subtle quantization that's occurred when light begins to travel slower. And then when light travels even slower, it's still the same four things, but now they diversify even more. So you begin to see many more distinctions, but yet if you go deeply enough into any distinction, you'll find that there's one thing that's dominant there. It might be knowledge or power or presence or harmony, and yet it might be informed by hundreds of different elements that come from these different sets, in a sense. So, and that's the basis of diversity. When diversity shows up here, so no two things are alike in this material realm, but yet in this kind of framework, there's a kind of a mathematical sense of it, that you have these four things that create infinity, and whatever the infinity is that you experience, even though it appears to be incredibly diverse, yet the seed thought, a seed idea that expresses what it is at its core comes from one of these four things, right? I mean, so the fourness is symmetrical, and then we see very practically in the material realm these sets of four that show up, space, time, energy, gravity, past, present, future, and matter, or the quantum particles themselves broken up into four categories, quarks, leptons, bosons, Higgs bosons. Or you look at the elements in a periodic table, S shell, P shell, D shell, F shell. Or you look at molecular plants and cells, nucleic acids, polysaccharides, lipids, proteins. I mean, so there's a fourness that, again, if you ask deeply enough, you can see that same principle from one of these four that animates the apparent distinctness that shows up in the architecture of whatever level you're looking at. But let me pause. I mean, I don't know if I was
answering. Yeah, so I want to add something to that, because Robert Anton Wilson, who's a writer about all kinds of mystical stuff, said that what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Right? So if you look at the world through a four lens, then you see fours. Right?
Sure.
Whereas if I look through a three lens, then I can see threes, like the Holy Trinity, or Brahma. Who's the middle one? Who's the one maintainer? Brahma,
so
Vishnu, and then Shiva, right? So if you look through a three lens, you see threes. But when we were talking in Las Vegas, we talked about there's an eight symmetry, especially elementary particles, right? So what I'm quite intrigued about, because of what's just been brought up, and especially to do with power and the way human beings relate to power as positive or negative, like almost like a spin, right? So dark, like a positive quality, mature or immature, lightness or shadow, so brought into the light or in shadow. That these four qualities, there's kind of like an unhealthy version, a healthy version of each one. And then that gives you kind of an eightfold symmetry, which you see in elementary particles. So first, I'd like to say it depends what the way you look at the world determines the reticular activating system. What you have selective attention for, you see more and more of, because the mind creates, right, according to the lenses we see through. But I like when we went, that chat we had in Las Vegas of going from 4 to 8, because there is 8 is a really special thing going on. And so I'm intrigued by, with power, given Natty's question, is the kind of downspin and the upspin, for want of a better way of putting it, of what happens when power diversifies negatively from a moral perspective and positively. So when you were talking about power, I was thinking about all of the different qualities of power and all the different ways we relate to power. And directionality came to mind.
Yeah, great.
Because there's a way, yeah, go on.
No, yeah, those are really good points. And I think that, again, you know, with these are, remember, we're just talking about a specific framework here, which is a cosmology of light, right? And it's a particular point of view. It's not saying that it's the only point of view. And in this point of view, you know, if you take light projected at 0 speed, then you in fact have the origin of the opposite of what exists when light travels infinitely fast. So if you got power in all its glory, when light travels infinitely fast, when light's projected at 0, you got power in the opposite of its glory. You know, so you've got it in its darkness, in its kind of like fragmented aspect of itself. And so in a sense, that creates a polarity of what power could be. So that creates a basis for like thinking about things in terms of 8-ness, right? Because then you've got the 4 positive and you've got the 4 negative. And then practically speaking, when you look at this physical realm, it's an interpenetration of these different influences. So you're going to have 8, right? I mean, you're going to have the positive and the negative. Always.
Okay, so then, so let's go in the other direction, from 8 to 4 to 2.
Yeah.
Which of those 4 go together as one side, and the other 2 go together on the other side, would you say?
So can you elaborate?
So we added spin, which took us from 4 to 8, yeah. Right? If we go back in the direction of oneness towards light,
yeah.
What is the 2 quality? So which ones go together between presence, knowledge, harmony, and power?
So I'd be curious to hear your interpretation, because
you see what I'm doing? I'm creating a meta form from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 into multiplicity.
And I also think that within those 8 possibilities that you mentioned, there are actually, like, to me, there are infinite possibilities, because there are infinite possibilities of the negative of each form. Like, absolutely. When you talk about control and domination, there is not just one type of control and domination. There can be infinite forms
number,
of control.
Diversity.
And same way, like when there is glory, there can be infinite forms of glory. So I think if we take that infinite form of all the aspects, then probably it would all lead to oneness. Like if we can embrace all that infinite forms, because when we consider that there are infinite possibilities for each thing, like each aspect, then together all can become one. So like one is infinity and infinity is one.
Yeah, thank you.
I would combine knowledge and power and presence and harmony, by the way.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I would say I would put power and knowledge together, and I would put presence and harmony together.
That's what I thought.
Which is form and emptiness.
But why? Why is that? Because of a bias that?
Well, I see Natty agreeing. So,
no, but anyway, but let's because I want to be sensitive to time. You know, we allotted 1 hour here, right? And I don't know if people have to move on to something else. But if you want to continue, I'm totally fine to continue. But if you would rather pick it up some other time, we can do that as well.
Let me tell you why, though.
Yeah.
Right, because there's an intuition about 1, 2, 4, 8, and then into infinite, like splitting, right? Even cells split into 2, and then into 4, and then right into 8. And that, for me, what was missing was the 2 level, right? And so, and it could be done in many different ways depending on the criteria. But it's just an intuition that somehow power and knowledge go together, and presence and harmony go together. Okay. So you start from 1, then you come, and I don't know what that quality is. I called it form and emptiness, right? but you go from 1 to 2, then to 4, then to 8, then into infinite diversity. That was what I was
I
thinking.
think you can combine anything with anything and justify that. Like, for example, if you combine knowledge and power, you could say that knowledge is power. It gives you strength to navigate the different life situations and whatever problems you're having. But at the same time, like, I could combine harmony and power, because for me, harmony is something more closer to love, like bringing everything together, like cohesive reality. But at the same time, the way world is, love isn't effective without strength, because someone who is really very nice or really loving is many times crushed upon. So in order to survive the world, one needs that strength and courage to be able to put love in a more dynamic and powerful action, rather than that soft beautiful thing, rather than that soft nurturing aspect. So there might be also a laser like love that makes you that kind, that might look as a bit hard, but that kind of makes you progress faster. So
Okay, hang on.
those are the
So-
love that we need. So I think we can combine anything with anything, and we can justify and bring it to oneness.
Great. So, final comment. Now we're into group theory, which is that you can. Now we're looking for 4C2, which is a calculus, right? So, which is any combination of 2's within the 4, and when you do that, which is a thing, you generate strands of knowledge and creativity, of what is power and presence, power and knowledge, power and harmony, presence and knowledge, presence and harmony, knowledge and harmony. And now you've got like a matrix of creativity.
So that itself would lead to infinite possibilities. Like if you combine one thing with everything, one thing with 4, so that would itself, and then within that one, there would be again multiple dimensions. So again, that's all leading to infinite, and then can be seen as oneness.
I wanted to bring it back to Natty's original question on my comment. I was going to bring up the antithesis too of these fourfold properties, because I think it's a helpful way of interpreting what I was talking about as needing to step down and kind of an impetus and a reason for stepping down into the finite, and looking at, so if you have omni-harmony, or if you're all harmonious, there's no way to explore what that means until you have some disharmony, and that begins to help you understand what an all harmonious state is. But you can't have an all harmonious state unless you have some form of disharmony, and as soon as you step down, you create some form of disharmony, and then it grows, and until we hit the complete anti-realm. Same with all of those other properties too.
I see that as my job, to create a catalyst of a bit of disharmony.
Cool, awesome, thank you. Yeah, I love it. Go ahead, Nadia.
Can I share something? Please. So correct me if I'm wrong. So what we are saying, that as we are closer to faster light, we have less diversity.
Sorry, say that again. When you go from?
We have less diversity or less variety.
When you do what?
When you are increasing the light speed.
Well, so
no, I think at both ends, isn't it? Both ends there's zero diversity.
So there's different meanings of. It depends how you interpret diversity.
Oh, I said variety, not diversity intentionally.
So there's material variety versus maybe subtle variety. So it's different. I mean, so whatever is contained within that infinity contains all possibility. But to totally appreciate it, you would have to be able to see that in a particular way, right? But certainly the way that we're habituated to see is where we ascribe value to how things show up distinctly at the material level. And so we associate variety with something that appears to be materially different. But that doesn't mean that that's the only variety that exists. I mean, so it depends. The point is always that the nature of light is always one, regardless of how it's traveling. And so all possibility exists within it. It just shows itself differently depending on the speed with which it's traveling, because the dynamics are different. That's all.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also think at higher